Doctor, an increasingly popular practice that we hear a lot about is hormone replacement.
Mhm.
How does that fit into it when we talk about some of the other hormones that you've mentioned?
Well, let's look at a hormone as being the tip of the tail of a dog. And let's look at the entire physiology of the body as being the dog. So we would much rather treat the dog than the tail.
Mhm.
And the reason for it is because it's easier. It's much easier to help pat the dog and get him to quit wagging his tail rather than to chase the tail all over the place and try to hold the tail.
Mm-hmm.
And so each one of those tails is a hormone you're trying to replace. So why don't we look at the basic physiology and biochemistry? Let's balance that, and either simultaneously or after we balanced it, then use what hormones we need. We know the adrenals secrete significant amounts of DHES, DHEA, cortisol, aldosterone, testosterone, androstenedione, estrogen, all three estrogens, progesterone, pregnenolone. So if we can get the adrenals strong, either before or while we're treating others, then we're going to find that, for example, if we're treating menopausal problems, that we need less hormone, sometimes not even any at all. If we're treating PMS, most of the time we don't need drugs once in a while, but most of the time not. Usually 400 milligrams of magnesium and balancing the adrenal glands is great. And one of the ways that people will know is that they crave chocolate during their periods when they're having PMS. Well, why do they crave chocolate? Because it's very high in magnesium. Once we start adding the magnesium and sufficient magnesium has been absorbed into the tissues, the woman will lose her desire for the chocolate. So we can decrease the amount of hormone used, sometimes even the hormones at all, once they get balanced. One of my favorite topics was to find third world country doctors and ask them about health in that third world. And one of my favorite questions was to ask them, what about menopause in your country? And without exception, they go, well, it's really kind of a non-issue. You say, what? And he says, it's just pretty smooth transition. There's a couple herbs they sometimes use, but really there's not much to talk about.
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe that in North America.
No.
And it's because the women in the cultures were so much more balanced. They hadn't had the stresses, the poor food, the lack of sleep, the pushing themselves constantly, so that by the time they got into the premenopause, perimenopausal period, they hadn't gone through 30 years of pedal to the metal, being a soccer mom and executive secretary and all the other things, working themselves to the bone. And so they got a chance to just let that happen naturally. So if we can get that body back to being strong, most of the problems that we talk about with hormonal issues will start to diminish. Now, I'm not decreasing the value of replacement hormones. It's just, it's not as good a medicine to simply try to replace a hormone. Take the adrenals, for example. They secrete over 50 hormones. There's no way you're going to replace all 50 hormones, especially not in the way that it's being secreted, because hormones are secreted at different times of day in different amounts. They are in balance with other hormones. For example, there's a cortisol testosterone interrelationship. There's a cortisol estrogen interrelationship. There's an estrogen progesterone interrelationship. There's a thyroid estrogen interrelationship. And the cognizant doctor has to be aware of these relationships and what they mean in this person to know the proper amounts of hormone to give them, and sometimes at what time of day. So the body is very wise in the thousands and thousands of years it took to create this homeostatic mechanism that we have. And there's no way we can emulate that totally from the outside. But during certain times, it's a good time, it is good to replace those hormones with the appropriate hormone and in the appropriate amounts. One of the ways that we know how much to give is we can look at a daily secretion of each hormone and know that we should probably never go over that particular daily secretion rate. Otherwise, we're probably going to get into side effects, or we're going to push another hormone down, or we're going to cause other health problems. And so it takes a wise doctor to balance hormones well. And that wise doctor will also know how to balance the thyroid and the adrenal glands before they get into very much thyroid replacement or into sex hormone replacements, because they know the physiology. They know once they balance the adrenals and thyroid, 80% of the problem has probably gone away. And then they need to touch up here and there and here and there. So if my suggestion is your audience, if they have a doctor whose their first jump is to immediately want to prescribe hormones, try to find a doctor who understands the physiology and the biochemistry better, that looks at ratios of different hormones of each other, that takes the time to explain what's happening in your body versus, here's, take this. And so there are doctors out there, and at the A4M conference, I meet every time I go here, I meet doctors that are doing this. In almost all medical conferences I lecture at now, I meet dozens of doctors that are practicing this wiser kind of medicine. So I'm happy to report that there's a growing number. I'm sadly having to report there's still a tremendous lack of those doctors.